Chapter 3 Conflict and Compromise 3.1 Conflict. Most children not only like to build, they also like to knock things down. So let's imagine another agent called Wrecker, whose speciality is knocking down. Our child loves to hear the complicated noises and watch so many things move all at once. Suppose Wrecker gets aroused, but there's nothing in sight to smash. Then Wrecker will have to get some help by putting Builder to work, for example. But what if, at some later time, Wrecker considers the tower to be high enough to smash, while Builder wants to make it taller still? Who could settle that dispute? The simplest policy would be to leave that decision to Wrecker, who was responsible for activating Builder in the first place. But in a more realistic picture of a child's mind, such choices would depend on many other agencies. For example, let's assume that both Builder and Wrecker were originally activated by a higher level agent, Play with Blocks. Then a conflict might arise if Builder and Wrecker disagree about whether the tower is high enough. And then there's a tree diagram showing some potential decisions being made. What aroused Play with Blocks in the first place? Perhaps some even higher level agent, Play, was active first. Then, inside Play, the agent Play and Blocks achieved control, in spite of two competitors, Play with Dolls and Play with Animals. But even Play itself, their mutual superior-in-chief, must have had to compete with other high-level agencies like Eat and Sleep. For after all, a child's play is not an isolated thing, but always happens in the context of other real-life concerns. Whatever we may choose to do, there are always other things we'd also like to do. In several sections of this book, I will assume that conflicts between agents tend to migrate upward to higher levels. For example, any prolonged conflict between Builder and Wrecker will tend to weaken their mutual superior, Play with Blocks. In turn, this will reduce Play with Blocks' ability to suppress its rivals, Play with Dolls and Play with Animals. Next, if that conflict isn't settled soon, it will weaken the Play agent at the next higher level. Then Eat or Sleep might seize control. 3.2 Non-Compromise. To settle arguments, nations develop legal systems, corporations establish policies, and individuals may argue, fight, or compromise, or turn for help to mediators that lie outside themselves. What happens when there are conflicts inside minds? Whenever several agents have to compete for the same resources, they are likely to get into conflicts. If those agents were left to themselves, the conflicts might persist indefinitely, and this would leave those agents paralyzed, unable to accomplish any goal. What happens then? We'll assume that those agents' supervisors too are under competitive pressure and likely to grow weak themselves whenever their subordinates are slow in achieving their goals, no matter whether because of conflicts between them or because of individual incompetence. The principle of non-compromise. The longer an internal conflict persists among an agent's subordinates, the weaker becomes that agent's status among its own competitors. If such internal problems aren't settled soon, other agents will take control and the agents formerly involved will be dismissed. So long as playing with blocks goes well, Play can maintain its strength and keep control. In the meantime, though, the child may also be growing hungry and sleepy, because other processes are arousing the agents Eat and Sleep. So long as Eat and Sleep are not yet strongly activated, Play can hold them both at bay. However, any conflict inside Play will weaken it and make it easier for Eat or Sleep to take over. Of course, Eat or Sleep must conquer in the end, since the longer they wait, the stronger they get. We see this in our own experience. We all know how easy it is to fight off small distractions when things are going well. But once some trouble starts inside our mind, inside our work, we become increasingly impatient and irritable. Eventually, we find it so hard to concentrate that the least disturbance can allow another different interest to take control. Now, when any of our agencies lose the power to control what other systems do, that doesn't mean it has to cease its own internal activity. An agency that has lost control can continue to work inside itself and thus become prepared to seize a later opportunity. However, we're normally unaware of all those other activities proceeding deep inside our minds. Where does it stop, this process of yielding control to other agencies? Must every mind contain some topmost center of control? Not necessarily. We sometimes settle conflicts by appealing to superiors, but other conflicts never end and never cease to trouble us. At first, our principle of non-compromise may seem too extreme. After all, good human supervisors plan ahead to avoid conflicts in the first place, and, when they can't, they try to settle quarrels locally before appealing to superiors. But we should not try to find a close analogy between low-level agents of a single mind and the members of a human community. Those tiny mental agents simply cannot know enough to be able to negotiate with one another or to find effective ways to adjust to each other's interference. Only larger agencies could be resourceful enough to do such things. Inside an actual child, the agencies responsible for building and wrecking might indeed become versatile enough to negotiate by offering support for one another's goals. Please, Wrecker, wait a moment more till Builder adds just one more block. It's worth it for a louder crash. 3.3 Hierarchies. Bureaucracy, the administration of government through departments and subdivisions managed by sets of officials following an inflexible routine. A definition from Webster's Unabridged Dictionary. As an agent, Builder does no physical work but merely turns on begin, add, and end. Similarly, add just orders find, put, and get to do their jobs. Then these divide into agents like move and grasp. It seems that it will never stop, this breaking down to smaller things. Eventually, it all must end with agents that do actual work. But there are many steps before we get to all the little muscle motor agents that actually move the arms and hands and joints and finger joints. Thus, Builder is like a high-level executive, far removed from those subordinates who actually produce the final product. Does this mean that Builder's administrative work is unimportant? Not at all. Those lower-level agents need to be controlled. It's much the same as in human affairs. When any enterprise becomes too complex and large for one person to do, we construct organizations in which certain agents are concerned, not with the final result, but only with what some other agents do. Designing any society, be it human or mechanical, involves decisions like these. Which agents choose which other agents do what jobs? Who will decide which jobs are done at all? Who decides what efforts to expend? How will conflicts be settled? How much of ordinary human thought has Builder's character? The Builder we described is not much like a human supervisor. It doesn't decide which agents to assign to which jobs, because that has already been arranged. It doesn't plan its future work, but simply carries out fixed steps until end says the job is done. Nor has it any repertoire of ways to deal with unexpected accidents. Because our little mental agents are so limited, we should not try to extend very far the analogy between them and human supervisors and workers. Furthermore, as we'll shortly see, the relations between mental agents are not always strictly hierarchical, and in any case, such roles are always relative. To Builder, add is a subordinate, but to find, add is a boss. As for yourself, it all depends on how you live, which sorts of thoughts concern you most, the orders you are made to take or those you're being forced to give. 3.4 Heterarchies. A hierarchical society is like a tree in which the agent at each branch is exclusively responsible for the agents on the twigs that branch from it. This pattern is found in every field because dividing work into parts like that is usually the easiest way to start solving a problem. It is easy to construct and understand such organizations because each agent only has a single job to do. It need only to look up for instructions from its supervisor, then look down to get help from its subordinates. But hierarchies do not always work. Consider that when two agents need to use each other's skills, then neither one can be on top. Notice what happens, for example, when you ask your vision system to decide whether the left side scene below depicts 3 blocks or only 2. The agent C could answer that if it could move the front block out of the line of view. But in the course of doing that, move might have to see if there were any obstacles that might interfere with the arm's trajectory. At such a moment, move would be working for C, and C would be working for move, both at the same time. This would be impossible inside a simple hierarchy. Most of the diagrams in the early parts of this book depict simple hierarchies. Later we'll see more cross-connected rings and loops when we are forced to consider the need for memory, which will become a constant subject of concern in this book. People often think of memory in terms of keeping records of the past, for recollecting things that happened in earlier times. But agencies also need other kinds of memory as well. C, for example, requires some sort of temporary memory in order to keep track of what next to do when it starts one job before its previous job is done. If each of C's agents could do only one thing at a time, it would soon run out of resources and may be unable to solve complicated problems. But if we have enough memory, we can arrange our agents into circular loops and thus use the same agents over and over again to do parts of several different jobs at the same time. 3.5. Destructiveness. In any actual child's mind, the urge to play competes with other demanding urges, such as eat and sleep. What happens if another agent wrests control from play, and what happens to the agent's play controlled? Suppose that our child is called away, no matter whether by someone else or by an internal urge like sleep. What happens to the process remaining active inside the mind? One part of the child may still want to play, while another part wants to sleep. Perhaps the child will knock the tower down with a sudden vengeful kick. What does it mean when children make such scenes? Is it that inner discipline breaks down to cause those savage acts? Not necessarily. Those childish acts might still make sense in other ways. Smashing takes so little time that Wrecker, freed from play's constraint, need persist for only one more kick to gain satisfaction of a final crash. Though childish violence might seem senseless by itself, it serves to communicate frustration at the loss of goal. Even if the parent scolds, that just confirms how well the message was transmitted and received. Destructive acts can serve constructive goals by leaving fewer problems to be solved. That kick may leave a mess outside, yet tidy up the child's mind. When children smash their treasured toys, we shouldn't ask for the reason why, since no such act has a single cause. Besides, it isn't true in a human mind that when sleep starts, then play must quit and all its agents have to cease. A real child can go to bed, yet still build towers in its head. 3.6. Pain and pleasure simplified. When you're in pain, it's hard to keep your interest in other things. You feel that nothing's more important than finding some way to stop the pain. That's why pain is so powerful. It makes it hard to think of anything else. Pain simplifies your point of view. When something gives you pleasure then too, it's hard to think of other things. You feel that nothing's more important than finding a way to make that pleasure last. That's why pleasure is so powerful. It also simplifies your point of view. Pain's power to distract us from other goals is not an accident. That's how it helps us to survive. Our bodies are endowed with special nerves that detect impending injuries, and the signals from these nerves for pain make us react in special ways. Somehow they disrupt our concerns with long-term goals, thus forcing us to focus on immediate problems, perhaps by transferring control to our lowest level agencies. Of course, this can do more harm than good, especially when, in order to remove the source of pain, one has to make a complex plan. Unfortunately, pain interferes with making plans by undermining interest in anything that's not immediate. Too much suffering diminishes us by restricting the complexities that constitute our very selves. It must be the same for pleasure as well. We think of pleasure and pain as opposites, since pleasure makes us draw its object near, while pain impels us to reject its object. We also think of them as similar, since both make rival goals seem small by turning us from other interests. They both distract. Why do we find such similarities between antagonistic things? Sometimes two seeming opposites are merely two extremes along a single scale, or one of them is nothing but the absence of the other, as in the case of sound and silence, light and darkness, interest and unconcern. But what of opposites that are genuinely different, like pain and pleasure, fear and courage, hate and love? In order to appear opposed, two things must serve related goals, or otherwise engage in the selfsame agencies. Thus, affection and abhorrence both involve our attitudes towards relationships, and pleasure and pain both engage constraints that simplify our mental scenes. The same goes for courage and cowardice. Each does best by knowing both. When on attack, you have to press against whatever weakness you can find in your opponent's strategy. When on defense, it's much the same. You still must guess the other's plan.